Welcome everyone to Auntie's webinar. Participants are slowly but surely joining. The list is growing by the minute. Today we have a wonderful topic on how to regulate emotions at the workplace. And Auntie professional Hanna-Kaisa Raninen will start in just a moment. Hopefully as many of you can join in the live version as possible. If not, please take a moment to watch the recording later on. We can use the chat and Q&A boxes for any comments and questions, preferably so that if you have comments, general discussion, you can do so in the chat and use the Q&A box for any questions that you may have. We will take all questions at the end, as many as we have time for, but I will be facilitating the chat throughout. Without any further ado, I will actually give the floor over to Hanna-Kaisa on the topic of regulating emotions at the workplace.
Thank you, Henrikka, and good morning to everybody. Today our topic is regulating emotions, and it's of course a little bit gloomy November at the moment, so maybe a very well-related topic to that as well. And shortly about myself before we get into the topic, I work as an Auntie professional. My background is in business and in sport and exercise psychology. And with my Auntie clients, I mostly talk about stress management, recovery, leadership work, and teamwork, also very current topics in my work. And recovery, of course, this time of the year, very, very current for many people as well. But our agenda for today will roughly go through these three blocks here. So we're going to look at building blocks of balanced emotional landscape at work. So what does that consist of? Then we'll get into how to regulate emotions as well. And then at the end, hopefully you have some questions, ideas, comments, your shared experiences that you maybe want to put into the chat, and we'll get back to those at the end of the webinar today. But today there's a conscious choice in this webinar to going over emotional regulation, but not only that. So it's easier to have influence over the emotional landscape with preventative measures. And we're going to look into maybe even more today of how to create a favorable emotional atmosphere at work in the first place. So usually we're, of course, focusing on how to tolerate those difficult emotions at work when something goes wrong, when there's some negative feelings that causes suffering, and how to deal with those. We'll get into that as well, but maybe at least first we'll focus on having influence over the total positive emotional landscape that works as a shield. And then it's easier to also go through those more difficult feelings when those inevitably arise as well. But just as a clarification before we go forward. Well, building blocks for a balanced emotional landscape first. So, of course, here are things that you've probably seen and have heard many places, many times, but it's just very true that all of these things act as balancing factors for us when we are looking at our emotional regulation, our emotional well-being. So you probably can think of times when you've been pretty tired, haven't been sleeping properly, haven't been eating properly. Maybe you haven't been able to engage in a physical activity or an exercise routine that is good for you personally. And you can feel that you're feeling a little bit off kilter. Things are not quite in balance. So we are in that way also physical beings, and we need all of these to be emotionally stable. It's easy to get frustrated or irritable when we haven't been sleeping properly, and we know that during sleep, emotional regulation actually happens during stages of sleep as well. So I know each and every one of you can relate to this from a personal perspective, being tired and not really quite on your best mood. And when you take care of your body's needs, it has this circular effect as well. So when these are in order, you're kind of feeling that the well-being routines are in place, then that kind of creates in and on itself more positive feelings, and more of those positive feelings then can kind of help you regulating these factors here in your everyday life, and that then again creates even more of a positive cycle. And some practical choices here that you can think about if you're already regulating sleep wise, if you have a good routine there. Of course, sleep is something we cannot always regulate or decide that now I'm going to sleep well. It would be so easy if it were so, but unfortunately, there are factors and things outside of our control that sometimes sleep just doesn't come or is not as as good quality as we would like. But maybe you have an alarm clock in the evening that kind of reminds you that now it's time to get my sleep hygiene going. Now it's time to kind of get to calming down in the evening, or somehow preparing for sleep and trying to regulate your body activity and mind activity to kind of down regulate those a few hours before your wanted bedtime. Or maybe physical activity wise, you decide that you go for a little exercise straight after work so that you kind of don't get into that energy slump when you get home. But right after work, you do maybe something that kind of wraps up the day, go for a walk around the block at least and get some fresh air. Or even going to the gym twice a week and then rest of the time kind of focusing on getting those steps in, or whatever it is for you that is something that is suitable. Or then thinking about breaks as well, taking care of your mind, taking care of your body by taking regular lunch breaks kind of away from the computer, getting to the cafeteria and having lunch either alone, if that's something you need at that time to be kind of shielded from conversation somehow, or maybe being with people and chatting about something really not work related at all. So that would act as a refresher for you throughout the day. And then when you're kind of refreshed and recovered in these small moments throughout the day, then it's much easier if something kind of more difficult comes along. It's much easier to then notice those emotions and deal with them in an effective way. So all of these very, very important. And maybe you can think about your own routines at the moment. If there is something here that is really working at the moment, or something that you would like to still pay a little bit attention to. Then talking about boundaries. So boundaries are love for ourselves and I would say for others as well. So learning to set those boundaries at work related to your working life, related to workload, for instance, and then related to other people as well. And the same principles of raising children are also suitable for us adults. So we need routines and we need some boundaries and kind of that we operate within those boundaries. And emotions at work are often related to boundaries in a way that we may feel that those boundaries have been overstepped somehow, maybe socially or in terms of the workload, as I mentioned. And it's important that you kind of increase self-awareness. You kind of think about a little bit, take perspective in what your boundaries are, what your wishes and needs are, and express them clearly and stick to them with a good deal of determination. So that then helps you in dealing with difficult emotions as well, and you feel much better. Kind of when you don't stretch beyond your limits all the time, then it's easier to feel maybe more pleasant emotions and less unpleasant ones. Sometimes, of course, with Auntie clients, we talk about boundaries in a sense that sometimes setting those very good boundaries that are according to your values and that you recognize that are important may still cause not only positive feelings, but those negative emotions as well, let's say you have decided that you will stop working at 6 o'clock and not stretch the work day because that's an important boundary for you, and you will want to go and have some exercise or do other meaningful things for you during your free time. So then there may be a mix of emotions there. So that kind of good feeling of setting that boundary and doing things that are meaningful for you, taking care of your recovery and well-being, but also maybe fear of how I'm perceived now that I stop a little bit earlier than usual, maybe, or maybe that something was left undone, or I didn't finish it now. So how to then kind of control those type of things as well. And of course, a good idea there could be maybe have a journal moment there, or write down what you kind of need to continue tomorrow, or somehow kind of wrap the day up at that point, so it would be easier to detach from work thoughts and then move on to your free time. And then, of course, socially speaking, um, let's say there are some difficult interactions at work and you kind of tolerate some sort of negative behavior constantly or for a very, very long time. So then you start to feel um, that irritation towards that other person, or maybe somebody's always late with their deadlines and that affects your work, but instead of saying anything about it or confronting the issue, you just kind of tolerate it for a long time, and you let that boundary that you have uh, that boundary gets overstepped constantly. So that then can cause, of course, irritation as well. And just for a moment, I will let you do this exercise from Nedra Glover Tawwab's book about boundaries. I think this is very wonderful short exercise to see where you are at with your boundaries at the moment. If you need more boundaries, I'm just going to let you go ahead and read them for a while. If you recognize some of the listed experiences here, maybe your emotional life could be balanced by drawing more boundaries and defining them, recognizing them at first, and practice sticking to them. And practice is the key word here. We cannot be perfect the first time we try, but I think it's important to have some behavioral goals that you can try and kind of see maybe those low-level, low-hanging fruits that you can try at work. But here you can see those negative feelings expressed that we were talking about in the beginning as well. When thinking about regulation of emotions, the focus is usually on experiencing these heavy emotions. Of course, there can be situations in working life where you kind of need to rope in your excitement because that would irritate the coworker who is under a very high workload, for instance, or their motivation is a little bit lower, so your enthusiasm irritates other people, and you need to regulate that as well. And many times with Auntie clients, we talk about regulating enthusiasm in that way, because then if that would lead to increased workload or working throughout the evenings, even though it would be positive at first, then maybe clients many times recognize that in the long run they have experienced that this type of enthusiasm, when not regulated, will lead to tiredness. But most often, of course, help is needed to regulate feelings that are causing us suffering. And when you have this miserable feeling, before trying to change it or influence it in any way, it's good to kind of stop and take a breath and just face the emotion and the feeling, and maybe trying to do a little bit of a chain analysis of what is this feeling, naming it first, and where is it coming from, what's its message for me in this moment. You may, for example, feel that you are irritated by a coworker, and the underlying reason for this is that the coworker speaks to me in a way that seems somehow offensive. And then, of course, we can think about that. Would it be worth raising the issue somehow or ask for clarification if something feels offensive? Maybe asking that, hey, I'm interested in your viewpoint. Could you tell me a little bit more? Or I didn't really understand what you were trying to convey. Could you specify it a little bit? Or asking those clarifying questions as well. So maybe that would lead to a more sustainable way of working together. Or maybe you're recognizing that you're feeling more exhausted than usual lately, and it's happening more and more. Then maybe it would be important to kind of ask for help to structure your workload better, or maybe ask help from a manager to talk about your priorities of work. So maybe there is just too much to do. So asking for support is part of emotional regulation as well. Or sometimes kind of our own way of working can influence how we feel. Maybe we feel a sense of chaos, of irritability. So we can, of course, always search for a solution directly based on the problem. So maybe using noise cancelling headphones, or thinking about that, hey, now I'm feeling it at the office more and more. So maybe I could schedule more remote days. Or maybe when I'm working remotely, I feel this sense of loneliness and dread and all of these things. I feel I'm not connected to other people. So maybe I organize more office days where I can go and have lunch with my colleagues. So regulating emotions that way as well, and recognizing where and when these feelings arise. Or maybe regarding boundaries as well, that I don't have any focus time in my schedule, in my calendar. It's just packed with meetings. I feel irritated because I don't have any break between meetings. This is also a very common topic with our Auntie clients, is that where does that irritation come from? It's not having a break to go to the toilet, take a glass of water, have any kind of a break in between meetings to process what has been said. So that can cause kind of this buildup of emotions as well. Well, then let's get to regulating emotions. And here is a very good kind of a graph for you to think about. So, of course, first, naming the feeling is important. So stopping and taking maybe a few breaths when the feeling is already there. It's already a reality. So something has happened. You're feeling maybe the negative emotions, the effects of it already. So what to do then? And here I think it's good for everyone to kind of expand their toolbox and think about what they're using, and maybe some of the ideas here are new to you. And of course, different methods can alleviate feelings in different contexts with different individuals as well. But first, kind of remember to stop and name the feeling. So rationalize with words. Just naming the feeling calms our brain chemistry somehow. So I'm feeling irritated. I'm feeling anger. And thinking about kind of what is this really about? Doing that chain analysis. What is happening here? Where does this feeling come from? Sometimes we can maybe recognize the immediate effect. Something is happening right here. Somebody said something. And then maybe going a little bit further, we can see that I haven't been really sleeping properly. So that's part of the issue. Have I been eating properly? That could be also part of the issue. So doing that type of analysis as well. And of course, we know that many contradictory feelings may arise at the same time as well, and that we don't really have too much control over what emotions arise. And maybe you have a presentation or a speech coming up, so you can feel fear or enthusiasm, or both of those at the same time, kind of interchangeably there. And whatever feelings arise, it's good to try and be self-compassionate and kind of accept the feeling. So that's, of course, another step as well. So when we get a negative feeling, something that we wouldn't like to feel, sometimes there's another layer of suffering that we usually kind of add to it, which is that I shouldn't be feeling this feeling. I should push the feeling away. I'm weak for feeling this way, and or whatever thoughts may arise there as well. So maybe we can kind of alleviate that a little bit by just reminding ourselves that this is a very human experience and everybody feels this way sometimes, and all feelings are okay and acceptable. And just kind of thinking about what type of comfort you would maybe long for right now. Maybe you can put a warm hand on your chest, or just kind of soothe yourself physically somehow if that's possible in the situation that you're in, or just if that's not possible, maybe taking a few breaths that maybe in a meeting or with other people it's not that noticeable, or just kind of somehow trying to calm yourself down. And breathing, of course, is something that we do no matter what. So in that way, we can kind of calm our nervous system by taking focus on the breathing and trying to breathe a few times. And of course, everybody knows the saying that take a few or count to 10, for instance, before you say something. If you're in a situation where you feel that maybe irritation, for instance, is bubbling up, so taking a few calm breaths can help you regulate that emotion as well. And then turning for support. So comforting company support, what could help you in this? Is there maybe a coworker that you could go and vent to, talk about it? Is there somebody that you can call? Or maybe it's about kind of ignoring the feeling in that way. In that sense, sometimes we cannot always deal with the feeling when it arises. But maybe emotional regulation could also be going to have a coffee and talking about something fun and light and kind of not really related to the actual matter. It doesn't mean that we would ignore the feeling or kind of push it under the rug, but sometimes it can help to get some perspective when we have some maybe humor and laughter to counterattack something like this. And then for some people, maybe physical activity can also work, some more of a physical approach somehow. Planking, doing squats, or going for a walk around the block, something that kind of forces our concentration to go into something physical. So out of our heads into some physical activity. And this can work in other ways as well. So if you are, let's say, in a meeting, this is sometimes an example that Auntie clients tell me that they're in a very difficult meeting with difficult people with a difficult topic, and there are kind of many feelings bouncing around, and you're feeling quite uncomfortable. So then it can also help that you maybe have these strategies preemptively thought out. So if I get very irritable, then maybe I would stand up and just say that, hey, do you mind if I take a few steps here, or stretch a little if it's a long meeting, or then maybe just going that, hey, would you mind I just go and get a glass of water? So something kind of in not so visible in that way to other people, that you're maybe regulating your irritation or anger that way, but something to kind of get you moving a little bit. Or then other kind of preemptive strategies, of course, can help. Maybe if we stick to this meeting example, so sometimes it helps that if you already know that there are going to be difficult feelings in that meeting, so maybe writing into your journal beforehand all the fears you have, all the emotions that you think are going to arise. So kind of just abstract writing everything down on a paper. So it seems that could also help in these situations, that you kind of preemptively think about those things and just put it all out on paper. And maybe also kind of preemptive strategies could be that you think about some sentences, some things that you can say if things get heated or things get somehow uncomfortable, maybe, as I said before, asking for clarification is a good one. So thinking beforehand if you have a feeling that this could be somehow an event where emotions are high. Good, but let's go back to the beginning of the webinar. So kind of boosting positive emotions is a important part of emotional regulation. And the starting point is to create conditions where pleasant feelings appear more easily. So taking care of our own needs and our own recovery, our own boundaries, and kind of tune our work as much as possible to suit our personal needs. Of course, it's not always possible. And maybe avoiding the chaos, avoiding the irritability by taking care of those boundaries, securing focus time, taking breaks, shutting down distractions, and so on. Of course, we are social beings, although kind of that quantity and quality differs from person to person and kind of also may differ during our lifespan, how much of social interaction we need. But when kind of thinking about the way you work, have you thought about hybrid work or remote work? How could you regulate that interaction as well? And when you need maybe more focus time, how are you going to arrange that? Or how do you feel positive emotions? If you're remotely a lot, could it help that you would go to the office? And maybe the purpose of that office visit would be to kind of have fun with the coworkers as well and feed into those positive emotions that could then take you uh, a few days remotely as well, or the other way around. Kind of, it depends what your working preferences are that way. But kind of having that light banter, uh, somehow informal discussions as well. How could you do that in meetings? How could you build that type of trust is also very important when looking at the whole complete atmosphere at work. And how do you kind of add sense of accomplishment and joy and gratitude to your work day? Or would it help that you would actually give some nice feedback to a colleague or thank somebody, just kind of making these specific things, specific kind of efforts within your team could also boost your own emotional atmosphere to the better. So maybe from this webinar, you already have something that you could try and practice to balance your emotional landscape. And now we have some time for questions or your comments or shared experiences. So Henrika, if you have anything there, so we have some time.
Yes, we actually have two excellent questions, and thank you already at this point for the wonderful content today. We actually have questions from slightly different angles, so maybe hopefully we have time to take maybe both of these. The first one comes presumably from a sort of employee level, asking how can I deal with the situation when I feel like management pushes me down, thinks that all my concerns are useless. I feel demotivated and don't want to help others at all. Don't feel recognized. Is there a way to feel differently?
Yeah. Well, that's a very unfortunate situation if that's the feeling. And of course, not knowing the specifics and thinking about it here. I think that's a very kind of common thing that we talk about with Auntie clients many times as well, that there is something going on. But I would kind of maybe think about all of these things here today. If those are already in check, talking with the manager, of course, about these things as well should be part of the job. Maybe not in those words, but kind of, is there somebody at work that you can get support from? Is there a mentor or a coach or maybe an Auntie professional that you can talk to? So kind of having maybe some other perspective from outside of that work perspective could also help. So that's kind of my first thoughts here.
I think that's as good an answer as can be for such a difficult question, an unfortunate situation, as you mentioned. And actually, we have two additional questions that are kind of similar, looking at it from a slightly different perspective from either HR or a manager's point of view, asking to put it simply, on balancing other people's emotions, how do I help calm down an employee in the midst of a strong emotional reaction in a meeting without diminishing their feelings? And this was kind of similarly asked also by someone in a managerial role.
Well, that's an excellent question. So thank you for that. Well, then if there are other people around and somebody's having a very emotional reaction, so then of course, maybe on a one-on-one scale, I would just advise to actively listen and kind of, in a way, let that other person vent there for a while, and then maybe asking some coaching questions of, could you maybe clarify? I noticed that you are feeling frustrated. Could you tell me a little bit more of where that's coming from? I think that's a pretty good question to ask there as well. So not to get too much involved in the feeling, or maybe noticing your own feelings that way as well, that somebody is kind of being somehow pretty emotional. So then noticing your own feelings. I'm noticing that person X is now annoying me. I'm feeling irritated, for instance. So I think as a managerial role, for instance, very important you calm yourself down in those situations, that you can then proactively react. And then another point comes to mind, that if it has been somehow offensive or somehow behavior that is not maybe tolerated within the principles, common working principles of the team or within the organization. So then, of course, having a little bit of a talk one-on-one afterwards, that maybe kind of some clarification would be needed, or just a reminder of how we kind of would behave in these situations as well. But maybe going back to, if it's a manager role, kind of recognizing and labeling your own emotions to stay calm within that situation.
I think it's an excellent reminder that sometimes people simply need to be also reminded of common principles and practices and good manners, because sometimes it seems that unprofessional behavior or strong emotions are tolerated to a very large extent. And sometimes it's also a matter of setting some ground rules about what kind of emotional outburst is actually acceptable in the workplace.
Exactly. And of course, it's a managerial responsibility to talk about workplace behavior as well.
Very good questions. We are now a few minutes over time already. Final question was about the slides and recording. So everyone that has signed up for the recording, for the webinar, will get the recording, I believe, already later today to be watched at a later stage. But thank you for the excellent questions. I think we could have gone on for even longer, but we will start wrapping up now in order to not take you too long over time.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, have a lovely day, and see you next time in Auntie's webinars. Bye-bye.